Hey, on the notion of free will, our soul, and the equality between all human beings, it is it's a good point to question whether or not we have free will, and I feel that when we look at it through the lens of syntropy, where the base premise of syntropy is really all about that everything in life performs a function with purpose. I've often described the will or our will in our own individual self as our compass for navigation. And it is like an instrument that can perform a function with purpose. And most humans do not necessarily know how to apply it effectively. And partly that's because the English language has been construed in such a way that we have very common use of wanting something, but we're very uncommon in the use of I'm willing that, I am willing for this, I am willing for that, because the will is tied psycho-emotionally and viscerally in our cells. And when we express our will, when we start experimenting with that, we will notice that once we've become willing to come into awareness or something, or willing to get out of a behavioral pattern that we recognize is tied to an old story that we want to get out of, that we're then willing to get out of, our cells have the capacity through neurochemical associative memory of the will being declared to quote unquote remind us that we have actually already willed access, we already willed movement forward out of a story that we have been operating in or under. And so for me, this idea of free will makes it into a noun, while the will is actually a verb. And so when people say that we actually don't have free will because our soul has chosen to come here and therefore has already, before it even incarnated, has already foreseen or forefelled, or the people don't actually go into that part, that the soul knew it was going to get injected during COVID. It already signed up for that. That to me is spiritual bypassing, and it's something for humans to avoid actually feeling the real feelings around that. It's a way to excuse or even let go of a curiosity. Like, oh, I wonder why they chose to do that. Well, the answer to the question why through the lens of syntropy always is human damage when it pertains to human ecology. It is very, very rarely, unless it involves practical navigation. Why did he choose to go left? Well, because that's what he chose to do. And then we say, but why did he make that choice in that way? Well, if it isn't involving a story of there was detriment happening in the event that we're relating around, then very usually we would end up with, well, that was his choice, that was his free will to do that. But the reason that a lot of people do things that are contrary to their health or well-being, or they kind of contravene their healthy progress in life, it's all because of the patterned way that they've been formed psycho-emotionally. And quite frankly, humans are mostly and predominantly a bunch of reactive human beings that are reacting continuously to out of themselves patterns or events or circumstances. And the way that they respond or react to those circumstances is based mostly on neurochemical associative memory attached to or viewed. So the external reality is being viewed through the language of archetypal narratives. And when a scenario or an event plays itself out, the neurochemical associative memory will used what it has used in the past as a way to navigate those circumstances or events. And with that, if there's unresolved emotional imprinting in the cells, aka trauma, then very likely it will be an emotional reaction, an actioning again based on what was imprinted. And that's almost an inverse of what the natural way of responding would be. And so the answer to the question why people chose to get injected or got conned into those scenarios is that they have pre-existing human damage. And then we could say, well, their soul chose to come here during this time. And it is a wonderful, you can hear in the sound of my voice how I dismiss that notion and that I'm dismissive of it in the connotation of my sounding, because it is a way to bypass and outsource any sense of getting closer to the real feelings that we ourselves have about it. Because one may actually ask, why is it that you don't have love and acceptance yet for the fact that these people chose to do that? Why is this story still a story? And the answer to the question, why is human damage? And then we get again and again the opportunity to look within. And that's tied to primary imprinting. And really, this one is around betrayal, of which all 5 primary imprints, including and additionally the program of our unhealthy relationship with death, all those primary imprints are hanging, so to speak, of this umbrella of the primary betrayal, because what was betrayed was the natural order, our natural anticipation for love, acceptance, and navigating together in contributive ways where we were being raised as opposed to being taught, brought down how to behave and how to operate, because this is how grown-ups do it and this is how it works. There's hardly any questioning for grown-ups because of cult programming, and this is a very substantial aspect of the observable reality that humans are very rarely really operating based on their will and their willingness as an instrument for navigating life. And it is in a way how I feel myself around it, that this very much ties into our sovereignty that we've been programmed out of, and the cult programming that comes with it all is something that goes missing in a lot of the understanding of how did we get where we are now. And it's the backdrop upon which most humans are actually navigating reality at large for their own life. And when humans have been cult programmed to not be in touch with their will, because that got already so compromised during the process of the birthing practices that are upheld in the Western world, we have a whole human civilization that doesn't have direct access to their natural instrument, their quote-unquote free will for navigating life and making choices based on their yay and their nay and what's attractive and what doesn't feel attractive. And that truth that lives in them, being free from emotional reactive patterns, allows them to be in a space of freedom. And so they have the freedom to feel their nay, and therefore also the freedom to express their nay. And that is something that we would maybe call free will. And when we say that free will actually doesn't exist, it is not a noun. It is a verb. And it is there to be used as an instrument for our navigation. But due to the cult programming and the social conditioning, many humans don't have free access to that sense-felt, feeling-based truth that resides within them. And when we bring the soul into it, and that we are a spark of, and a unique spark in that way, with a unique blueprint that is connected to source in the greater quote unquote scheme of things, call it God, that is very truthful. But to say that our souls have chosen to come here and therefore we have each already predeterminately agreed that we are going to be going through this, and in hindsight it will turn out that we didn't actually have free will because it was, to me, that doesn't make any sense unless you can see and look at that, and you can see it through the lens of syntropy and look at that from a place of being free of cult programming, cult conditioning, and operating in a true space of love. And that's almost like a strata, is that when a tree species arrives at the year, so to speak, of its peak production, and this comes straight out of syntropic agroforestry, every species of plants and trees have a peak in their growth process, and it will be their peak harvest, and it may last 3-4 years, but it will be huge. Particularly fruit trees are very noticeable for that. And after that, it starts producing less. And so the purpose of the tree is to bring about more quantity and quality of consolidated life into the system, while it also executes on its own primary objective to grow towards this peak expression of what its beautiful, unique quality and talent is to produce mangoes, or to produce avocados, or to produce the most beautiful flowers for the bees, because it is as a little shrub of mint going into the flowering stage, after which it goes into the seeding stage, after which those seeds can then be naturally distributed by wind or animals crossing through the fields. And so there is a continuation, a reincarnation, a reseeding continuously of these individual species that are all enshrined with reproductivity and productivity of being able to reproduce from its own cellular matrix the next generation of offspring. When we look at the soul and it being unique and it coming into human form, the human being is very much like a tree, where we also have a peak series of years after which there will be a steady decline. And the cult programming and the social conditioning on this earth has made it so that only a very few amount of people can actually access this deeper state of loving freedom, because they are still so much dabbling in what the people are saying, what the people are not saying, what the people are thinking. And there's so much preoccupation, there's so much unresolved story, and there's so much emotional reaction and psychological preoccupation around how to navigate this or how to navigate that. Free will would really indicate that we are free to express our will. And the free part, I feel, is much more relevant than the will part, because that would only be natural. If we were free from human damage, our will would naturally be functioning as an instrument for navigating decision-making processes. Is that will in freedom? And freedom is the domain of the beloved. It is a space of love that we have within ourselves that is at peace. And that peaceedness, that peacefulness, allows for the will to just be a nay or a yay. And so for me to reflect on the soul and to how it comes in and how it incarnates and what it chooses for. Yes, it chooses for a certain environmental, social demographic and a certain family based on soul family. And these things are extrapolatable, so to speak, from the spiritual stratas into the physical strata. So where we have a physical human family on the earth, we also have a spiritual soul family in the, call it, soul realm. And that's individuated aspects of God before the soul fully reintegrates with source as a whole, which is an option, which is the end of the incarnating cycle. And that's what some spiritual traditions are indicating, that our human journey is really all about, is to get out of the wheel of karma and get out of the wheel of reincarnation and reach enlightenment during this lifetime, so that we are free to not have to come back to free ourselves up. And this is the testing ground here on earth, where we can do this in the physical, where we can become an embodiment of love and loving kindness that is free of even attracting circumstances and events, because they no longer perform a function with purpose for our growth, aka our liberation. And yet when I reflect on that soul narrative of choosing for every single event that has already happened, it would be wonderful if all of our souls knew ahead of the game that it's 20 years in or 30 years in, you'd go and have this car crash. I think it's beautiful spiritual baloney, and it's a beautiful way for spiritualized human beings of the Western world to bypass what actually really wants attention, which is a feeling-based reality of sense-felt emotions that want to be expressed, reflected upon, and most beneficially questioned as to their function, and from that place be able to access an opportunity to become more free within. That's where I say that love and acceptance leads to freedom. Really what that means is that loving and accepting that what is allows us to return ourselves and ourself to the freedom that we actually naturally are from within. And so there is a component to this where in the strata of the soul family and the strata of souls that we can bring into this narrative. I feel, however, that it's most important to address the notion of free will, and that the will is not a noun, but it is a verb, and it is an instrument for our navigation on the earth. And the question is really more about, it's not so much about do we have free will or not free will, and people will go into theological debating styles or offering perspectives based on what the Bible says, and that there's only God's will, and that ultimately we don't really have much of a will. Every human being has an ability to feel whether going left or right is a yay or a nay. And so it is factually that we have choice. It's just that it is to be used for the function with purpose that that instrument has been installed into our cellular metric for. And that it's therefore not so much about whether we do or whether we don't. It is more about what do you do with it. And if you feel that you don't, for whatever reason, that you could question, well, that's interesting, because if what I'm hearing pertaining to the will as an instrument for my navigation, am I actually really in tune with that? Every human being is. Most human beings have fear as a response mechanism to making a choice. Reason for that being is that their will got overwritten. There was trespass on their sovereignty, on their free will already at birth, and through cultural conditioning over and over again, their will in terms of what they're choosing that aligns with them was overwritten again and again and again. So there's a lot of trauma on this story of will. And the people that bring up the notion that we actually don't have free will are, how I feel in my cells about it, are offering the majority of listeners to those narratives a way to spiritual bypass their inability, and what it does, it's like, oh well, then I'm just going to relinquish my sense of giving direction to my own life, and I'm just going to relinquish that because, well, it all actually doesn't matter. In the end, it all doesn't matter, and that doesn't. Nature isn't operating on the that doesn't matter. Nature only operates on everything matters, because everything in life is performing a function with purpose. The best way to discover what the function with purpose is to question it. And so when we then question the function of the will as an instrument for our feeling-based way of navigating life on the earth, we can again ascertain that our own quote-unquote free will, that for a lot of human beings may not be experienced as being free, but more kind of like held captive due to unresolved emotional imprinting that cause fear reactions in the cells when they're asked about what is it that you want. The will actually is here to perform a beautiful function with purpose. The question is it free? And so if it isn't free, what can we do in order to give ourselves access again to something that is part of our original blueprint, our feeling-based nature? And that requires going inside into that internal landscape and finding the pathways to create freedom for the emotional imprints that are holding us back from feeling free to sense our will, to speak our will, and to therefore then also act on our will. And that is the syntropic way of relating to free will, and this story around our soul already having chosen to come into this world. And so we don't really have a lot to say about what it's all going to be encountering. We have a say in every given moment when there is a point of choice to be made. A lot of humans like a spiritual bypassing. It's very attractive. It's very comforting because we don't have to actually take and assert responsibility for the absence of us actually actively being free to feel our will and to navigate with that. And so a lot of human beings that love spiritual orientations and perspectives are probably, and this is an assumption, but I used to be there myself, they're probably just outsourcing their responsibility to a concept and a construct of perspectives that has them therefore not re-enable their will, but find a comfort blanket to not have to actually feel and get real with themselves around the fact that they're not freely operating in their will, but they are choosing to avoid more so operating in spiritual fantasies so that they don't actually have to take directive assertion of their own sovereign dominion that they have over their body, a soul having that, and in the process of restoring the will, our soul will be able to incarnate, so to speak, deeper and more effectively, because once we create freedom around our will, the circumstances and events that we're currently attracting into our reality to serve a function with purpose for our growth, for us as the tree to fully express the fullness of our peak production and really reach that peak of our talent and gift, our purpose to become expressed on an individual soul level, that will become much more accessible.